Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Atlantic Council. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Redefining US Strategy with Latin America and the Caribbean for a New Era. My name is Andrew Mikta. I'm a Director and Senior Fellow of Scowcroft Strategy Initiative at the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council. Having vibrant and fruitful relationships with Latin American and Caribbean countries is vital for U.S. economic and security interests. Yet there is a perception that the United States has pulled back from the region. How can the United States rebuild its partnerships in Latin America and the Caribbean over the long term? This is the question that, in partnership with our colleagues from the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, we sought to answer. Today, we're delighted to launch a new Atlantic Council strategy paper titled Redefining U.S. Partnership with Latin America and the Caribbean for a New Era, which is the culmination of a year-long effort by the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center and the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. The Latin America Center and at the Atlantic Council aims to broaden understanding of regional transformations while demonstrating why Latin America and the Caribbean matter, not only to the United States, but to the world. And the Scowcroft Center works to develop sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the United States and its allies and partners. The proposed strategy that we unveiled today was informed by the US-LAC Future Strategy Working Group, which included former government officials and civil society from the region, Washington and beyond, as well as by conversations with current officials and business leaders from the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Thank you to the working group members who are able to join us today in person and online, as well to Adrienne Arsht, Executive Vice Chair of the Atlantic Council and founder of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, and Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation's Resilience Center, Ambassador Andres Duran from Uruguay, and Ambassador Ramon Martinez from Panama, who are in the studio. We greatly appreciate your support. Thank you. Today's event and publication complements another recent collaboration between the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center and the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, which culminated in a strategy that focuses on how to counter malign Chinese and Russian influence in the region. Both strategy papers underline the importance of the region and demonstrate the cross-cutting expertise and cooperation that the Atlantic Council brings to the table. I am thrilled to have such distinguished speakers join us today for the unveiling of our report, including Juan Gonzalez, Special Assistant to the President of the United States and Senior Director for Western Hemisphere at the National Security Council, Madam Diana Mondino, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Argentina, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Mark Wells, former President of the Inter-American Development Bank Luis Alberto Moreno, and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador, Maria Eugenia Brizuela. Once again, thank you all for joining us. I will now turn it over to Dr. Megan Reese, non-resident senior fellow with the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, who will moderate the first panel. Megan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing me, and I'm thrilled to see so many people here today. I wanted to first introduce Minister Diana Mondino. She is an economist and Argentina's Minister for Foreign Affairs and Worship. She was most recently a professor at SEMA University, and she held director positions at a multitude of companies and banks, including Pampa Engineria and Banco Supervia, both listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Minister Mondino is also on the board of directors for the Food Bank Foundation. And we're especially excited to hear from her today because of the effort that Argentina has been making recently and really engaging in the US. Secretary Blinken was actually just in Argentina with President Milei, and then President Milei was actually just here at CPAC and met with former President Trump. President Milei is focused on navigating the political tides of the US at the moment, and it's really energizing to see his critiques of China and Russia and really strong alignment with the US. I also wanted to introduce Juan Gonzalez. He's the senior advisor and special assistant to President Biden, and he's the senior director of Western Hem for the National Security Council, which means that he hasn't slept in years at this point. He was a senior fellow at the Penn Biden Center and previously Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere. And he has been back and forth his entire career between the State Department and the NSC. And I'd also like to introduce Jason Marzak, who's the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Latin America Center since 2013, I believe. He's testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as well as the House Foreign Affairs, and he teaches at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs, and he worked previously at the National Endowment of Democracy, a place I love dearly, and was also a House staffer. I was a Senate staffer, so there's a little competition there.
No competition.
No competition, no, just friendly banter. I wanted to turn for questions first to Minister Mondino. Minister Mondino, you lead the foreign affairs of Argentina, a country that has taken on one of the most profound economic transformations that we've seen globally. How can Argentina's international partners best support its efforts to control inflation, accelerate economic growth, and generate new jobs? And what specific actions can the US government and Congress take to position the US as a partner of choice for Argentina at this very critical moment in geopolitics?
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for the invitation, and it's an honor to be here. And actually, though I was told that I should have only 5 minutes, I can speak for about 2 hours what we hope we can do with Argentina. You know, we have embarked ourselves in a new era. We want to have an open market economy. We need to promote investments, reinforce the rule of law, something that has almost been forgotten in Argentina, encourage competition, and full integration with the global economy. That is most important because Argentina needs to grow to alleviate poverty. And this is happening in the context of a global landscape that is presenting numerous challenges. You just mentioned some of them. And, well, you can never underscore the importance of cooperation and collaboration with Western countries, chosen among others, and of course, the United States, international financial institutions, etc. But we will choose our partners among all the liberal democracies. You know, we want to rebuild trust. We want the international arena to understand again what Argentina can and will do. And our current government aims both to stimulate long-term recovery and, well, I hope we can do it, regain status as a reliable partner and be, again, trustworthy in the international stage. We have applied for OECD. We have declined an invitation to become members of the BRICS. We're actively engaged with the IMF. We have presented a comprehensive program to stabilize public finances. We need to eliminate inflation. We need to reduce our deficit. You know, the deficit in Argentina, the federal level deficit is 15% of GDP. May I say that again? 15% of GDP. That's the scope of the problem that we have. And at the same time, we need to do that. We need to grow. We need to regain sustainable growth. So all those things at the same time are challenges because, as everybody knows, bringing down inflation is usually recessionary, and actually, on the contrary, we need to restart growth. So I'm sorry, I'm sure you will have the question about debt vulnerabilities, etc. So as your question, as what can or cannot be done by the United States or Congress to be a partner of choice to Argentina, well, actually, what we hope we can do the right thing, and we hope we can do the best thing for our society, and at the same time, not let go of our values, not let go of our liberal, I know, sorry, for liberal, it's different, libertarian principles, and that we become a partner of choice. And actually, this is not that something the US should do to counter Chinese or Russian influence, as you mentioned. That's not the point. I beg to disagree. Actually, what US has to do the right thing, again, and hopefully other countries, same as we are, will choose to become members of the international community and open ourselves for free trade. So the best thing that we can do, is trade with each other, is become, keep the rule of law and become trustworthy partners. That, I think, is the best thing that we, on ourselves, will have to do whatever happens on your side. And I think that on your side, you will find that Argentina and many other Latin American countries potentially, not now, but potentially, will do exactly the same.
Okay, appreciate that. Juan, I'll turn to you next, and I'll kind of combine these questions a little bit. I wanted to ask you, can you set up the why of this report? Why is there growing influence of some of these bad actors in the region? Why is a reinvigorated strategy needed? And as you think through the strategy, you think political, economic, and military, what is the specific end game of the administration at this point?
It's an excellent question. What I would ask, why did the Atlantic Council not present this on my first week when I was on the National Security Council is really the main why. But I think it's relevant not just because the United States is entering an election year, but frankly, with everything else going on in the world, we need to remember that the security and the prosperity of Latin America and the Caribbean has direct implications for that of our own. It's something the president reminds us of on a regular basis. And I'll say the Atlantic Council, and I'm not saying this because I've known Jason for a long time, but as long as I've been working on Latin American issues, the Atlantic Council is always looking for policy-relevant recommendations, looks to stimulate the debate in a bipartisan way, and puts forward recommendations that frankly help us do our work. And so in that regard, I think it's an important first step to really promoting a conversation about where we should go on Latin America and the Caribbean. What I will say, highlight very briefly, is that there's a lot of overlap with our national security strategy. And if you look at it, not just because I wrote the Latin America portion, but it is probably one of the most robust kind of Latin America arguments in a national security strategy in the last 200 years. Now, I mean, like I think in recent, in modern history, and that's because there's a statement in there that says that the region's democratic development is fundamentally in the national security interest of the United States, and that really puts aside the kind of the ideology and looks at what we can get done to help democracies deliver. I think there's a lot of overlap with our focus on North America, and a lot of what is in here, I think, is specific and concrete to, I think, using the tools that we have to manage economic cooperation. What I mean by that is, on the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity, second to North America as our economic focus, it is the countries of the Americas Partnership, because we have free trade agreements with them and want to build on those free trade agreements. There's a lot in the report that I think speaks to those, but also I think requires us to look at some of the challenges that we have to implementation, which is that in a middle and high income region, the United States lacks the policy tools it may have in Africa or in places that are in conflict. How do you work, for example, with a country like Argentina to really be able to, build a relationship that we had 20 years ago as one of the closest relationships we had in the Western Hemisphere, and that's a mill-to-mill. It's economic, and so I think there's a lot there that we can definitely work with. On the China angle, briefly, I think why is it? The question people ask is, why is it that China is really out kind of circling the United States? I think on one part, if you measure it in terms of trade in goods, certainly when it comes to foreign direct investment, the United States is very competitive. But I think a lot of the challenges that we've had with China is just that, is that when you're trying to, for example, work on mill-to-mill with a country like Argentina, the way that our foreign military sales process works is they have to pay cash up front. And China is offering low prices, extended financing, and lots of support. So, a country's going to decide what's in its interest, and its interest is finding, assets that they can afford and help build up their arsenal. Another one is, I would say, is at the Inter-American Development Bank is something that we actually have been engaged on very actively. The reason that China is actually in the procurement process been doing so well is not because the rules favor China, but because there hasn't been a robust effort to attract U.S. investment, which I know that's something that the American Development Bank is doing now. This March, the IDB will also take up the question of whether to expand equity for its private sector lending arm. This is something that in 2015, the U.S. decided not to take an equity stake in IDB Invest, and China did. So at this point, if we're not actually investing to expand our equity stake, then we're ceding the space. So a lot of it is about being present, and there are very specific, I think, recommendations here that are definitely actionable, some of which we're doing, some of which we can be doing much better.
Wonderful. And Jason, why do you consider this the right time for implementing this strategy? And can you speak to a couple of the specific recommendations, for instance, on friendshoring or the energy objectives in the report?
Well, thanks, Megan, and Mr. Mondino, thank you so much for joining, and Juan, thank you so much for being on this panel. You know, really important to invite Mr. Mondino, who actually has a quote in the paper about the importance of supporting Argentina at this time of deep economic transformation, and Juan, I guess we can, you know, go back 10 years and see what else could be implemented. But I would say it's been really great to work with you at your time at NSC, and I think this might be your last public event in your current role as NSC Senior Director for Western Hemisphere. So just congratulations to you on all that you've achieved, and hopefully you'll have some time to get some rest for a little bit. You know, Megan, I think what was really important about the strategy paper is the process in which it was put together as well. The strategy group we put together was purposefully half Latin American and Caribbean leaders and half from the US. And that is important because as we're thinking about our strategy, it should be a strategy with the region, not for the region, but a strategy with the region. And that was really important. Actually came up in one of our consultations. We did consultations with all the Latin American and Caribbean ambassadors here in Washington, with currently serving US Chiefs of Mission, with Hill offices up on Wall Street as well. And the importance of a strategy with the region really resonated. And as well, when we were looking at the strategy, we saw three guiding principles for implementation. One is prioritizing cooperation. Second one is being nimble and pragmatic at the same time. And third, prioritizing Latin America and the Caribbean within the broader global context. And you know, I think what's incredibly important, what we try to put forward in this paper, is the importance of readjusting our toolkit. The U.S. toolkit that is oftentimes favors consequences instead of incentives for growth and incentives for change. And what we put forward as part of this paper is what could be some of those incentives that actually could move the region concurrently with the United States as a strong partner. The four elements that we put in this strategy paper are the importance of economy, investment, and commerce, energy security, migration and security, as well as democracy, institutions, and governance. And those really, as Juan says, it really mirrors many of which is the national security strategy, because those are some of the key issues that we heard from leaders all across the region of what could be put forward. And you know, I think what's important as part of this paper is the importance of the bold ideas that we had, but also pragmatic ideas that could really help to move things forward. Nearshoring was one, right? And we have a nearshoring working group here that we started in December. And what we see is a real opportunity to better align some of the push and pull factors behind nearshoring, and really an opportunity to further align the work that's being done in Congress, the work that's being done in the White House and State Department, the work that's being done in the region, and then the private sector as well. That's just one. You know, there's also some bold ideas in there. There's this idea of creating a transatlantic or a partnership that's similar to the Quad, a partnership that would bring together countries. Trans-American economic partnership that would bring together countries across regions to really focus on some of the key pillars: economic cooperation, energy collaboration, technological advancement, things that would actually help to improve lives of those people in the Americas from a day in and day out basis. I'll say that Senator Kaine, who's the chairman of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, he pens the forward in the paper, and I was pleased that he said in the forward that the strategy is comprehensive enough to meet the moment, pragmatic enough to work, and bold enough to matter. And I think that is absolutely fundamental as we move forward.
Yes, absolutely. 5 minutes left. Minister Mondino, I have one last question for you. How crucial is the role of multilateral institutions and regional cooperation mechanisms in forging a new US, Latin American, and Caribbean partnership?
Actually, I would say that they are really crucial because there's various things. First of all, we all need investment. Second, we all need a good guidance regards what is a good SDG. How do you really create and protect sustainable growth? And last, because we need to cooperate. Each Latin American country is big geographically, but none of our economies is really big, except maybe for Brazil or Argentina or Colombia. But in general, we're not big economies, and we need to sustain each other. We need to cooperate with each other. So I think the multilateral institutions have a crucial role in helping with that idea. Another very important thing is that they can help alleviate the suspicions of corruption. That's also very, very, very important. Unfortunately, because of public opinion and other things and other alternatives, people consider multilaterals as a way of just getting debt. Our children will be forever in debt because of multilaterals. That is something that we need to completely change. And let me go back to what Jason was saying about friendshoring. It is exactly the same thing with push and pull organizations, multilateral organizations. I mean, we need to be helping each other and understand what is it that's needed. At the same time, if we are going to consider those multilaterals, there are other ways of integration. Free trade agreements that almost don't exist in Latin America except for Mexico or Chile. There are other examples, but not that many. Mercosur in itself is a very, may I say, weak association among the countries, and we need to help each other in a lot of ways, most particular drug trafficking. I know you're asking about economic issues, but I mean, if we keep on having the level of drug trafficking that we have in our economies, it's very difficult to instill the right kind of values in the society and the possibility of helping. And we should prove to the world that we're willing to help each other and that we're willing to really work multilateral organizations in things that are happening in our backyard. Haiti, for example, what can or should be done with Haiti? I mean, we call it IT, and because Haiti looks like we're hating it, and it's not. We need to concentrate our efforts, our humanitarian efforts with them, and that's a wonderful way of proving to public opinion that multilaterals are actually helping, that we are a member of the global society, and that we have to enhance and have a better understanding of what can be done, at least among the people of the Western Hemisphere. So I think there's a lot of good roles that we can have with multilateral organizations.
Wonderful. And I will turn to each of you for 60 seconds for a last word.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, I think that there's a desperate need certainly for a long view on Latin America's economic prosperity. And I don't want to finish on a negative note, but I will say that look, the Latin America and the Caribbean has time, but not a lot of time. When you're looking at the demographic changes that are happening, how quickly technology is being adopted in other parts of the world, how a lot of these governments outside of the Western Hemisphere are actually being able to kind of move to higher levels of development. In Latin America, you'll have societies that by all measures should be on a competitive footing relative to Indo-Pacific partners, but a lot of it is because of the challenges of democratic development. And so for us, really a lot of the focus, and I'll leave this on a positive note and throw you a softball, is from the perspective of the president, it is less about where a government or a country sits on the political spectrum and more about how it is elected and how it governs. And that we, in a very complicated world, need to find common ground with any democratically elected government. I think Argentina is a perfect example. We're working with the Fernandez government, and as soon as Milei was elected, we rushed in because we wanted to show that we wanted them to succeed in actually being able to transform their economy. That commitment continues. We have a broad set of interests. But again, it's something that has to be met with urgency. It's something that we recognize and see the potential challenges if there is not action on the economic front. And I think this strategy actually presents a lot. I'll say very briefly, so in addition to the Americas partnership, in the US Congress, there's this debate. You have Senators Cassidy and Bennett, Espaillat, and Salazar that are working on the Americas Act. We're not going to opine on actually legislation, but they're asking these same questions that I think are also touched upon in the report. And so to the extent that this is something that continues to stay in the center of the kind of Washington psyche and informs policy, I think the outcome will be benefit not just for the United States, but for the region.
Well, wonderful. Thanks, Juan. And I'll add to that. I think that why the strategy now, right? And Minister Sommerfeld of Ecuador, Foreign Minister, writes that in the paper that emerging risks call for a new strategy. And I think that is absolutely fundamental. There's also been for quite some time. Western Hemisphere oftentimes is taken for granted. It's taken for granted the stability, the potential for prosperity in the hemisphere. And this paper makes a call for the fact that we cannot work based on how we worked in the past. There is disillusionment with democracy in the hemisphere. There's discontent with democracy, and that makes it even more important for U.S. global leadership to have this strategy, which is a 5-year strategy, purposefully, so that it can transcend political cycles. To have a 5-year strategy that helps as part of a partnership, helps leaders to actually show their citizens why democracy matters and the benefits that democracy brings. But on top of that, we talk in the report the fact that the Latin America and the Caribbean region is incredibly important because of the numbers, the fact that it's a powerhouse, the natural wealth in the region, the number of commercial partners. Half of our free trade agreements are with countries in the Americas, and so on a positive note, that is why the Americas are important. There's also risks if we don't implement a strategy like this. There are economic risks, there are geopolitical risks that we've talked about, and there are also growing security risks. And so that makes it even more fundamental to have this longer term vision and be able to implement aspects of the strategy that really can benefit everyday lives.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Quiero que aunque norte y sur sean distintos, lleven un mismo latido en el ritmo, como quien comparte el mismo apellido, porque al fin y al cabo somos latinos. Quiero que la unión que logra la fuerza rompa divisiones y abra más puertas. Quiero que entendamos que cuando todos sumamos se hace la diferencia. Diversos como hay sean distintos, lleven un mismo latido en el ritmo, como quien comparte el mismo apellido, porque al fin y al cabo somos latinos. Quiero que la unión que logra la fuerza rompa divisiones y abra más puertas. Quiero que entendamos que cuando todos sumamos se hace la diferencia. Diversos como hay palabras en el diccionario, todos los significados usan el mismo abecedario. Yo soy como tú eres como yo. Cada reto juntos, si estamos juntos, sabe mejor cuando ganamos. Como tú eres como yo. No cierres el puño, que somos uno cuando queremos dar la mano. Soy como tú como yo. Soy como tú como yo. Soy como tú como yo. Soy como tú. Este es el momento, ni antes ni después. No dejes para luego cuando hay tanto por hacer. Sempre há melhor caminho e o que temos percorrido serve pra crescer, serve pra aprender. Você é como eu, sou como você.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am Valentina Sader, Deputy Director for Impactful Programming and Brazil Lead here at the Adrian Irish Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council. For the second portion of our conversation, I'm thrilled to be joined by Acting Assistant Secretary Mark Wells, Minister Maria Eugenia Brizuela de Avila and Luis Alberto Moreno to further explore the potential of the partnership between the United States and Latin America and the Caribbean. Acting Assistant Secretary Wells is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs at the United States State Department. Assistant Secretary Wells has vast experience working in Latin America from the US and overseas in Colombia, Peru, Venezuela, Bolivia, Mexico, and more. Assistant Secretary, it's a pleasure to have you joining us today. Joining us virtually is also Minister Maria Eugenia Brizuela de Avila, a longtime friend and non-resident senior fellow of the Adrian Irish Latin America Center, who has an impressive career in government and in the private sector. She was first many times as the first woman Minister of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador, the first woman president of an insurance company at the Internacional de Seguros, and the first woman elected president of Banco Salvadoreño. Mayo, look forward to hearing your insights today. Thank you so much for joining us. Last but not least, we have Luis Alberto Moreno, a member of the Center's Advisory Council and Managing Director of Allen & Co., which he joined after concluding his 15-year tenure as President of the Inter-American Development Bank. Luis Alberto, welcome, and thank you for being here. Without further ado, let's dive deeper into the US-LAC strategic partnership. Assistant Secretary Wells, as you know, our strategy paper calls for a commitment to economic growth in the Western Hemisphere to be the central organizing principle of this partnership. You oversee State Department's Western Hemisphere Bureau. What do you think are some of the most effective tools in the U.S. economic toolbox? What additional tools would be helpful to better engage LAC partners in this realm?
Well, thank you, and thank you very much to the Atlantic Council. This is a great opportunity to explain where we are with the policy, but as well to just congratulate you on a great report. It certainly is something, you know, that as Juan mentioned earlier, it's great to be able to kind of step back and take a look at amidst all of the noise. And I think it does capture the changes that are happening in the region. I think it sensitizes policymakers to some of the issues that we need to be focused on over the next 5 years. So let me just answer that with 3 main points. It's just the Americas partnership, our partnership for growth, and then the PAC 2030, our Caribbean initiative. So, you know, the Americas partnership was announced at the Summit of the Americas by President Biden in June of 2022. Then he hosted the leadership of the America's Partnership last November, and what he said was, we want to increase opportunity and decrease inequity, harness the incredible economic potential of the Americas, and make the Western Hemisphere the most economically competitive region in the world. And the idea is, how can we take President Biden's vision for the bottom up and the middle out and translate that into our policy? So under this partnership, and it always is good to remember the members as they stand, as Barbados, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Panama, and Peru, and Uruguay. Although with an open architecture of being able to say, once we're ready to move forward with adding new countries, we can be open to that. Some of the things that we've done under the America's Partnership is we've developed a regional accelerator. This will bring together cohorts of entrepreneurs. We've seen already that has been funded at $5 million. I think what I also would say, just step back, is a lot of the things here deserve a couple more zeros at the end when it comes to funding. But what we're trying to do is prove the concept that we are ready for a new era in Latin American relations. So also they have the America's Partnership Platform, which is a collaboration between the IDB and our U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or the DFC, and this is a way to expand their cooperation and financing for high-quality critical infrastructure and other strategic economic sectors. And to this end, DFC and IDB Invest have begun initial consultations on $3 billion worth of projects identified by the institutions that may be eligible. On the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGI, the United States has, since the inception, has mobilized $30 billion in grants. A couple of highlights in the Western Hemisphere: we're helping Costa Rica with their cyber infrastructure, $25 million in funding there. In the Export-Import Bank, the United States has announced a $52 million loan guarantee to JP Morgan in 2022 to support a solar project in Honduras. The DFC also has announced a $30 million equity investment in Brazil to develop critical minerals mining platforms. So these are just some of the ideas that we have, and we have a lot more to do, as Juan Gonzalez mentioned earlier, a lot more that we can do. Climate diplomacy is another tool that we think we can drive a lot of our policies in the region. We've had remarkable response from the Caribbean countries. We've had a lot of disparate initiatives over the years in energy and in climate resilience, and we've sort of taken all of those pieces and seen how can we drive not only just clean energy conversion and transition in the region through technical support and also hooking them up with investment, but also talking about how can they be more resilient to survive natural disasters and climate change. So those are just some of the ideas that we have that are in our toolbox. We need to do a lot more.
I love that, you know, in the first panel we were talking about how aligned our priorities were with that of the government, but I think that, again, you're re-emphasizing that. I would like to turn it over to hear from the Latin America perspective as well. Mayo, reflecting on your tenure as El Salvador's foreign minister, how can Latin American Caribbean countries leverage their unique strengths and opportunity to ensure a more balanced and mutually beneficial partnership with the United States? In your experience as well, how do the approaches from other less democratic nations differ than that from the US?
Well, good afternoon. And isn't it stimulating to start this event with the title Redefining a Partnership? Not a plan or a simple strategy. It's a partnership. And this is what has really stimulated me along the many months the Atlantic Council has guided a dedicated team of collaborators from so many diverse fields to redefine this partnership. And now we are at the launch of this important paper, and thank you so much for the invitations to participate with such a distinguished panel. So I must recognize first that LAC countries have a long-standing strategic partnership with the US based on shared values, history, culture, and solid economic ties. But there's ups and downs, and sometimes we feel a bit forgotten. So it's nice to hear all of the participants who have spoken before me reinforce and see how this partnership does hold a geopolitical importance in today's contested world. So looking forward, to ensure a more balanced and mutually beneficial partnership, let me consider 5 approaches that we in Latin America should be looking at. The first one is to leverage those shared values and interests, because there is strengthened cooperation on global challenges, such as sustainable development and climate change, especially as our region really is truly vulnerable. And LAC and the US are allies in these areas, and their joint efforts can definitely create a positive impact. Second is to enhance the economic side. And here we both believe in fair and free trade and open markets, and we should see a trade expansion. LAC countries offer expanding markets for US goods and services, and thus we can attract and access new customers and diversify our export destinations. And the investment potential that exists, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, the natural resources, the skilled workforce, and the growing economies that present investment opportunities, especially in sectors like technology or infrastructure, are ripe for collaboration. And let's not speak about renewable energy. LAC is rich in renewable sources, solar, wind, hydro. And we see the potential for private sector leadership that plays a crucial role. Promoting multilateralism also, as Minister Mondino also spoke, it's so important that LAC countries, together with the US, who believe in multilateralism and a rule-based global order, that we are engaged in an inclusive dialogue. Fourth is to advocate for sustainable development. And here, LAC is committed to achieving the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and that we can cooperate in education and healthcare and poverty reduction. And finally, is to strengthen diplomatic relations. And this definitely goes through the soft power, the cultural exchange. And here we can see that the differences in the approaches of less democratic nations that compared to the United States show us in US individual liberty above the state role, government control versus autonomy, media freedom and information flow versus state-controlled media where prevails, often disseminating government-approved narratives. And finally, to emphasize the importance of the rule of law and judicial independence, civil society and activism, that again, as we understand these differences, it is so crucial for the effective diplomacy and global cooperation. Thank you.
Mayo, I think that you started to mention a bit some of the stakeholders that are relevant for the partnership besides the United States and the countries themselves. And I would like to turn it to Luis Alberto then to explain to us what role do existing multilateral institutions play in this relationship, and particularly in areas such as infrastructure and human capital development. Luis Alberto, over to you.
Well, thank you, Valentina. It is a pleasure and privilege to be in this panel. I want to congratulate Adrian Erst and the Atlantic Council for launching this redefinition of priorities, and really with a sight of having something much bigger. We are in an election year in the United States. This is the kind of thing that it's a great moment for this administration and for the U.S. government as a whole to begin to think of a more ambitious plan towards Latin America. In terms of what development institutions can do, certainly I would agree with Mark. It's all great initiatives that need many zeros behind. I applaud what the U.S. is doing in leading and supporting a major capital increase for IDB Invest. I think this will give IDB Invest a huge possibility of financing a whole host of infrastructure projects. There's things, for instance, that the Millennium Challenge Corporation has done in some of the Central American countries and in some of the smaller countries, which are really to be applauded. I've seen tremendously well-developed and very good infrastructure projects there that have been built in time and under budget, or certainly at budget. And this is not an easy thing to do. But clearly, this continues to be the single biggest deficit that Latin America has, are infrastructure deficits. And until we cannot address this, it will make it very difficult to become the kind of platform that we need to become to attract far more investment into the region. In terms of human capital, there's so many things that can be done. One of the things I'm always surprised is one of the secret weapons that the U.S. has is your community colleges. Community colleges in the U.S. specialize in areas of consumer products to ag to technology. This is a great way to offer technical careers to Latin Americans that could come into the U.S., quickly get a set of skills that they can go and put back to work in the region. These are some of the things that we need, but I think the fundamental issue here is to raise the level of ambition of what the hemisphere can do in a connected way. I think this is a time and day to really rethink the kind of trade agreements that we have. There is no region of the world that has more trade agreements with the US than Latin America. But yet, it's very difficult if you're sitting in El Salvador or in Guatemala to get the benefits that you get, for instance, being part of the USMCA. Rolling up all those agreements into one would make a huge difference. Doing things with countries that do not have current trade agreements, but for instance, where you could have something around the special minerals, like recently was done with Japan. Today, for instance, if you talk about the energy transition, it's all about the two major minerals that are sitting in Latin America with no small market share. 65% of the lithium of the world sits in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, and over 45% of the copper of the world. These are two essential minerals for the energy transition, but yet they cannot enter the U.S. duty-free, quota-free, unless you have a free trade agreement. So by the time you get another free trade agreement, it's going to take a long time, but for countries like Argentina, it would make all the sense in the world to have some kind of agreement around minerals, especially rare minerals, which are pretty abundant there, pretty abundant in the region, and the U.S. imports and depends on close to 80% of them coming from overseas. These are the kinds of things that I think we should put our minds to. They require, of course, in some cases, legislative action. But at the end of the day, we are in a very difficult moment in Latin America with low growth. Fundamentally, that growth is going to only be powered by investment. There's a lot of portfolio investment that historically has come into Latin America, basically from U.S. investors. There is increasingly investment from large families in Latin America coming to invest in the United States. But that's not enough. I think that the real secret, for instance, is as opposed to using lending with the DFC, for instance, how about using guarantees where you can crowd in far more resources and multiply for every dollar that you guarantee $5 or $6 more that can come in the way of portfolio investment. These are the kinds of creative tools that are doable, but need to be addressed and addressed quickly.
One of the main issues that we're talking about here are principles, and today's report highlights prioritizing cooperation and embracing nimbleness and pragmatism as key principles for implementation of a redefined US-LAC partnership. Acting Assistant Secretary Wells, drawing on your valuable U.S. government experience, could you elucidate on how the United States might effectively translate these principles into actionable strategies?
Well, that's what we try to do every day, of taking those principles. We take our institutions as they are, and we're trying to get new and better results out of them every day. So we do, as Luis Alberto mentioned, we have the DFC, we have the Millennium Challenge Account, we have the Ex-Im Bank, we have a great partnership with the IDB, and we're working on these innovative tools that I mentioned earlier on how we can get those types of results. I think the use of public-private partnerships, as Luis Alberto mentioned, is critical to this, of how do we activate private sector investment. That's some of the things we're trying to do with IDB Invest. As well, when we're doing this, though, we have to realize, as was said, we're in a new era, a new age. Trade agreements have to evolve. And so one of the things about America's partnership, for example, is we're stressing things like anti-corruption activity, labor standards and environmental standards, things that raise the floor so that we're not creating things in the past. I'm going to steal from the great Luis Alberto's book, Vamos, where he talks about the prevalence of inequality in the region. And so we think that the approach that we're taking is going to help with those issues.
And I know that I'm running out of time, but I did want to pose a final question to all three of you. Thinking about this, thinking about innovation, thinking about the digital age, technology and innovation play pivotal roles in shaping economies and societies nowadays, and we need to meet that. How can the US and LAC countries collaborate to foster technological innovation and digital inclusion, ensuring that such advancements benefit all segments of society? I'll start with you, Mayo.
Thank you so much. First, I think it's very important that we collaborate on building robust digital infrastructure. And that includes the broadband, networks, data centers, cybersecurity systems, and that we see and jointly invest in 5G technology that can revolutionize industries like healthcare. Second is the capacity building and the skills development that Luis Alberto already mentioned, that easily the United States could help us promote digital literacy and skills training for all segments of society. Again, this includes coding, data analysis, cybersecurity. But it's also important that the U.S. establishes innovation hubs that cater to diverse communities. And this hub can provide resources, mentorship, networking opportunities. And we can see that with how little money invested there can go a long way. And the last one I want to touch upon is that we help and support the SMEs. Small and medium-sized enterprise. It's important that we facilitate access to capital for tech startups, small businesses, that this can be done through venture capital or angel investors, government grants, but mostly that we foster an ecosystem where entrepreneurs can thrive. Remember that in my Central America, 70% of the economy is informal. We must do away with that. We must work to formalize the economy and give everyone equal opportunity and access to capital at good pace, but also tech support. Thank you.
Luis Alberto, any final thoughts on that?
Look, just building up on Mayo, just think of the following. Latin America missed the train of the Industrial Revolution. We cannot miss the train of the technological revolution. As Mayo was saying, the combination of access to bandwidth, faster, the 5Gs and whatever evolution comes after that, all point to the fact that you have to have bandwidth that is ample, that is available to everybody, and that is inexpensive. You don't want to have bandwidth that is expensive and slow. But that's part of the problem. All of that can be resolved through public investment. With AI, it's a different story because it is about how essentially you ask questions. And there's going to be a profound digital divide that is going to take place. And the productivity effects of AI, you already see in calculations in the US. They could be as high as 5 or 7x. This has been historically the biggest problem of Latin America is productivity. And if we are not able to embrace AI at a faster pace, we are going to be facing a challenge of productivity that we have not seen that will only translate in much slower growth. And therefore, I agree with Mayo that the secret here is how the US uses its capacity and its development on AI to bring together the hemisphere around how fast can people adopt AI. Otherwise, we're going to be in a situation of a north-south debate discussing around how to inhibit the development of AI because countries are going to be fearful of its development.
Acting Assistant Secretary, how do we do this?
Yeah, well, at the risk of being a little negative here at the end, remember all of this does have a dark side as well. So we face the challenge of dealing with things like misinformation in the region and cyber threats from malign actors or from anonymous sources, groups, hackers, and things like that. So, we've partnered with a lot of governments in the region to help them increase their cyber capacities. We've stood up our own cyber diplomacy bureau that is now looking at cyber as a discipline of diplomacy, because we realize that we have to get together and talk about standards and how we can react to things like misinformation and cyber threats.
And that is why this is the beginning of a longer project that we're working on. And with that, I wanted to thank Acting Assistant Secretary Wells for joining us, Mayu, Luis Alberto Moreno for this insightful discussion. Thank you so much. I would also like to encourage our in-person and virtual audience to check out the strategy paper that we are launching today called Redefining US Strategy with Latin America and the Caribbean for a New Era at our website, or if you're in person, using the QR code that you have on your seat. Now, to close us off, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Maria Fernanda Bosmowski, Deputy Director at the Adrian Arch Latin America Center and co-rapporteur of the strategy paper, who has spearheaded this initiative alongside Felipe Felix Mendes. Maria Fernanda, over to you.
Thank you, Valentina. I'd like to start off by thanking our speakers, especially two of our most dedicated working group members, Luis Alberto Moreno, Mayu Brizuela de Avila, as well as the moderators for your invaluable contributions tonight. Thank you as well to all who have joined this conversation. I do hear that it's standing room only in our studios. Tonight, we close out LAC Strategy Month at the Atlantic Council, but as Valentina mentioned, the journey doesn't end here. The release of our report tonight marks the beginning of an ambitious chapter in our work at the Atlantic Council. Stay tuned for an event next month with Southcom Commander General Laura Richardson, where we will continue the conversation on our two strategy papers. We are dedicated to bringing the report's actionable recommendations to life. As a rapporteur of this publication, I look forward to our continued engagement with the stakeholders and agencies and other actors identified in the report to ensure that these strategies are not just visions, but realities. With the rise of external influences in the hemisphere, it's imperative for the United States to reaffirm its commitment to the region. As we've heard in the conversations tonight, our strategy advocates for adaptability, practicality, and a prioritized focus on Latin America and the Caribbean within a global context. Our suggested approach is guided by cooperation, nimbleness, and pragmatism. We emphasize that the strategic importance of Latin America and the Caribbean as a whole, aiming to respond as effectively as our global competitors currently do. This is just the beginning. I'd like to close with a special and heartfelt thank you to Felipe Felix Mendes for his tireless efforts from the inception of this publication and event, as well as to Jeff Cimino and Sydney Sherry at Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security for their invaluable partnership. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Quiero que aunque norte y sur sean distintos,